Hi, I'm Frank Solero, and I'm here with Damian Andre, and also a refrigerator.
A refrigerator, yes.
This is a HyperScale appliance. Tell us about this guy.
Absolutely. So I was talking to Frank before about treating the appliance a bit like a refrigerator, right? When you buy something from Samsung or LG, you don't expect it to do stuff that it can't do. You're not going to, hack and whack it to make it work how you want it to work. So I like to think of these things as a bit of an appliance and refrigerator. So my team has done approximately 140 appliance installs, and we've learned a lot over the period. So we wanted to share some of that knowledge with you today. And yeah, my first piece of advice is treat it like a refrigerator. It's not something you want to sort of customize. It's not a regular media agent. This is a purpose-built convoled appliance that can only do a limited number of things, and it does those things very well. So you don't want to treat this like you would any other regular media agent where you can modify the operating system to do things that you want it to do. So yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah. So PS Guy's going to go out. They're going to deploy this. We're going to shoot a couple of different segments here to help everybody out. Just some general advice. What would the first thing that you would say to someone who before they're going out to deploy this?
Absolutely. So customer preparedness is the biggest piece. Like I said, we've done 140 installs, and all the installs that have gone perfectly, the customer was 100% prepared. There's a pre-install checklist that gets included in the box, and I think also gets mailed out to the customer. Don't skip that. That's not the manual you'll throw away when you're setting up your iPhone or whatever brand new thing that you just bought. That is super important because there's a bunch of IP addresses you have to set up. The DNS has to be pre-configured or the install will fail. You want to make sure that the customer has the right network connectivity. Often customers are surprised that, hey, I don't actually have 10 gig SFP or fiber connectivity. Can we use base T or Ethernet? And that's not actually a possibility with the regular appliance. You actually have to swap out the network card. So things like that. Preparedness is key. And if you have all those items checked, so if you have the checklist done, you're going to be a lot more successful on your actual install.
And what advice would you have for someone who is going out to do this for the first time? They read a couple things, they watched these videos, and they're that individual that says, I could do this. I don't need anybody's help.
Absolutely.
What would you say?
So we had a lot of early customers that had that same thing. Oh, I don't need help installing this thing. And the fact is, it is a complicated bit of kit, right? There's 3 different servers you have to manage. There's a lot of, like I said, IP address and DNS configurations and all that kind of stuff. So if you're not sure, just ask for help. So we'll put up an email address on this video, and that has a bunch of people from the products team, from the support team, and other various people that can actually help address any questions. So yeah, if you're not sure, rather than assuming something works some way that it doesn't, or you're not quite sure how to approach a situation or scenario, or if the appliance can support something you want to do, just ask, because we'd be more than happy to help, and it's much better ahead of time rather than you're on the customer site and it's not working, and then we have a sort of critical situation.
Yeah, and one other thing of note is the education team is releasing a HyperScale e-learning that covers off all the things, the pre-install checklist, running through the initial config, setting everything up, and I'm going to say the admin console because most of these are shipping on SP13, but we'll update it to Command Center once SP14 is released. That e-learning is free of charge, and they can log into ea.commvault.com. We, in this e-learning, also emphasize the importance of the pre-install checklist and how all of these things have to be done. So these videos are internal only. They're meant to prepare you to be able to deploy it, and this e-learning is going to be for the customer, so this way they understand what to expect when they get out there. So you mentioned preparedness, and I understand that we kind of think when we're technical people, we're like, all right, let's get into the weeds, let's figure all this stuff out. I often tell people from a customer standpoint, if they are if they experience a problem in their data center, no matter what it is, the first thing they should be doing is analyze and say whether or not I can figure this out or I got to call somebody else. So let's talk more about the preparedness before we get into all the details. And if you could take us a little deeper on what you mean about making sure you're prepared before you go and deploy this.
Absolutely. So the thing that catches a lot of people out is just the sheer number of IP addresses we need. So we have 3 individual units, and each one of those units needs a set of IPs. For the RMC network, which is the remote management controller, we need an IP address for the storage network, which is where the the nodes communicate with each other, sort of on the back-end cluster network. And then we also need the front-end data protection network, and we need a set of IPs for that too. So that can catch a lot of people out. We've had instances where, oh, I don't have enough IPs in the range, things like that. So that's the first thing you want to get and fill out in the checklist, is make sure that all the IPs are done. This whole appliance works on DNS. Everything is DNS related. Now, Linux does not play well with Windows DNS in a lot of cases because of the security, so we have to make sure that the DNS records are created ahead of time for all the IP addresses. So the DNS addresses for the nodes themselves, the DNS entries for the ComServe that you're going to be deploying, for hosted engine, which is the rev side, the rev management side of things, which I think we call the control host now. So yeah, there's various things that the checklist will guide you through, but we should absolutely make sure that those are done ahead of time. What we found is that if a customer has figured out, oh, I didn't do these things, they do it on the fly, and that's where errors happen or mistakes happen. So we have a typo in the DNS or the wrong IP address. Now with the latest installer, it's a lot more resilient, so it's going to handle issues like that. But it still means your install is going to fail. You're going to have to start from the beginning. You might get yourself into a situation where the appliance does not look good at that point. So we want to be prepared ahead of time to make sure that we can give the install the best chances of success. The other things is communicating with the customer and figuring out if they have the right network available. So do they have 10 gig? Is it 10 gig SFP, optical, or twinax? Those are the two options we have. If they want to go 10BASE-T and use sort of Ethernet copper, that is an option, but it requires a separate network card that you have to order separately. And we're finding that in a lot of cases, customers will order these for their remote sites and then say, oh, I only have I've only got 1 gig available. I don't have 10 gig. Can we make that work? No, we absolutely cannot make that work. This must be 10 gig. The installer will not install if you try, have 1 gig connectivity. The 1 gig ports you can use for management, but there's no ability automatically to use them for data transfer. So that's very important to discover ahead of time and make sure the customer's prepared for all that sort of network connectivity. The other piece is also the ComServe. Are we deploying a new ComServe, or are we connecting to an existing ComServe? That stuff needs to be decided ahead of time because it's not something you can change later. If you do the install without the ComServe, you cannot add it later to the appliance. And that becomes specifically important for the different install scenarios, which we'll talk about next. So gathering as much details from the customer as you can about how they want to deploy the appliance, what their strategy is. Do they want to do DRs? Do they want to do migrations? Do they want to do hardware refreshes? All that stuff plays into your install strategy and your preparedness. So I'd say those are the top things that will help you get a successful install. And we'll talk about the installer next.
It's interesting that you say that, and I have one more follow-up question. But I think often, especially when you're out there and you're under pressure to deploy and something goes wrong, you immediately think, oh, there's something wrong with the box, or there's something wrong with the code, there must be a bug. But out of the problems that you have seen, how many of these issues been related to, uh-oh, there's something wrong, versus, uh-oh, they didn't do something right?
Right. Yeah, the vast majority is, it's going to be that typo. It's going to be that copy and paste if you're using the web installer, things like that. So yeah, preparedness is absolutely the key. And yeah, if you do make a mistake, the installer has gotten a lot more resilient to detect those issues, but it will still fail at the end of the day. The good news is now we can actually resume from those installs and we can clean up automatically. But yeah, I would say, yeah, the majority of the issues are, basically things that we've done more so than the code or the installer or stuff like that.
So be prepared. All right, so we got past the preparedness part, making sure that pre-install checklist. We covered off some basic things, some basic gotchas. So now let's go to the next one. And what is this segment? What is it that you want to call this?
All right, so I'm going to call this install strategy because there's various options and things that you need to decide during the install, which is going to dictate the outcome of what you're trying to achieve. So first off, if this is a brand new site, that's probably the easiest install, right? New customer, new site, deploy a ComServe, you're all good. Where things become a little bit more complicated is if they're either doing a hardware refresh, so they want to connect to an existing ComServe, or they want to move their existing ComServe onto a ComServe running on the appliance as a virtual machine. That is the more complicated scenario. So let me walk you guys through that. So on a hardware refresh, when you do the install, you have to tell it to deploy a new COM serve, because that's the only way the VM gets created. If you say, hey, just connecting to my existing COM cell, the whole infrastructure that handles the COM serve VM does not get deployed to the appliance. And the reason for that is we want it to be as efficient as possible. So if we don't need to deploy the virtualization engine to handle a potential COM serve, then we're not going to do that. So it's not something you can add on after the fact. So if you decide, hey, I'm going to do a meter agent based install or an install without a COM serve, you cannot simply go back and add the COM serve to it later. So that being said, you have to then specify you want to create a new COM serve. Now, as you may know, there's two different ways to install the appliance. The first one is through a text installer. You'd run the setup SDS from command line on all 3 nodes. And the second method is if the customer has DHCP available or they preset the IP addresses, you can actually do a web-based install. The web-based install is leaps and bounds easier, but it does not support hardware refreshes and it does not support migration currently with SP13 or 14. I believe maybe 15 they're going to bring that in. So let me explain what that means. When you do an install using the web installer and you say provision a new COM serve, the meter agent nodes or the appliances themselves will actually be registered against the new COM serve that gets deployed, not your old COM serve. That's a problem because the new COM serve we need to deploy is just temporary. We just need it to be there as a placeholder for the incoming database we're going to be moving later. So that creates an issue because you don't want the meter agents to be registered against the new COM serve. So in order to avoid that scenario, when you're doing a hardware refresh and you intend to migrate an existing COM serve onto the appliance, you must use the text installer right now, at least for the guidance for SP13 or 14. So what you would do is run setup SDS. It gets to the point where you want to provision a new COM serve. You say yes, and then in the text installer, you'll get an additional screen that says, okay, where do you want to register the meter agent nodes? And you want to register them against the existing COM serve, not the new temporary one that you've installed. So when you migrate the database later, it's all ready to go. So that's the most, I guess, key important thing when it comes to hardware refreshes. It's a similar scenario with disaster recovery as well. So a lot of customers are buying 2 appliances. One will be in their primary data center, one will be in their secondary data center, and they want to have sort of this failover redundancy and have the option to copy data from one site to the other. Perfectly possible, but again, in order to set up the DR side, I need to provision a temporary COM serve machine that's going to be the incoming placeholder for a database that you might use. You might even think about using the new COM serve failover in SP14, which I'm sure you guys are going to be creating some videos on too. So yeah, that becomes an option. But the key piece is you can't simply say, hey, I'm going to deploy this as a regular meter agent and connect it to my existing COM serve, because now I'm going to have no failover destination for the actual COM serve on the appliance at the DR site. So yeah, both those scenarios, you need to use the text installer. You need to provision a temporary COM serve. And even if the customer thinks that they're not going to use the COM serve machine right now, but hey, maybe it's something I might consider in a year or two, or maybe in a year or two I might start using my second appliance as DR, then go ahead and provision that temporary COM serve because, like I said, it's not something that we can easily add on later. So yeah, those are the 2 scenarios I think are particularly important.
So my guess from your perspective, and we talked about PS going out there, doing the install, going it alone. If you have experience using the Wizard, the web installer, fine. If you're going to that text installer, get help.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you're not sure, if you get to a screen you're not sure about, just email the alias that we put up before or we'll put up again. Yeah, just get help if you're not sure, right? Because you'd rather be in a situation where everything's deployed properly than having to say, yeah, we didn't deploy it right, we need to re-image it, and stuff like that. It doesn't, it's not conducive to a good customer experience. So yeah, if you're unsure, then just ask.
Yep. A small question and a quick answer is better than support having to help you out and redo everything from scratch. So
absolutely. There's one other thing I wanted to cover as well. So currently, we've had a few scenarios where customers have said, okay, let's deploy everything at our primary data center, and then we're going to move one of the appliances to the DR. And the reason for that is they want to do seeding. So they have a very slow bandwidth link between primary and secondary. So they want to set it all up on one site, do the seeding through an aux copy, and then move the appliance. Currently, we have an issue with that. And the reason is if you are deploying a COM serve on the appliance, the Red Hat virtualization engine that gets deployed takes complete control over the networking. No matter what you do on the Red Hat side, if you go and edit the scripts to change IP addresses and stuff like that, that configuration will be completely ignored if you have Red Hat virtualization installed, which handles the COM serve VM. So you actually have to do some of those network edits through that utility. So this becomes an issue with the seeding, because in order to seed, I need to change the IP addresses when my appliance goes to the secondary site. Right now, we do not have a procedure for that. We've made it work in one site, and it was a full day engagement. Dev is working out a way to do that, but right now that's not really something that's supported. So if you do need to seed the appliance and ship it over, we might have to come up with a different strategy rather than installing it on the primary data center and changing the IP when you shift it over to the secondary data center. So I've no doubt that that'll be something we'll fix in the future, but right now that is sort of one of the challenges that we do have.
Sounds good. Thank you. Very valuable information.
Thanks.
All right, so one last thing that we want to talk about, we want to make sure, it's good, this is a really good example, because not only are we going to talk about a specific scenario and how to handle it, but also the fact that the SET team has produced a lot of documentation, a lot of how-tos and step-by-steps, and this is either available on Connect or, as Damien mentioned, the email address, always reach out. So tell us a little bit about this scenario, and this involves the ComServe and the temporary name and how to handle the move of the DR database to the other ComServe.
Absolutely. So when you're deploying, we spoke about this before, when we're deploying a temporary ComServe that's going to be sort of the placeholder for the database you're going to put in, during the install, it's going to ask you for the ComServe name. So during the hyperscale setup, either through the web installer or setup SDS, it's going to say, hey, what name do you want to give the ComServe? That creates an issue because we just want to give it a temporary name. We just need to get the ComServe up and running. So you don't want to import your database into the ComServe with that name. You want to give it the same name as the hardware refresh that you're doing, or if it's a DR scenario, you want to give it the same name as what your DR ComServe is called. So there's two ways to go about it. The first way is very long and complicated, and is not probably something you want to do. So you have to go in and edit the registry. You have to go in and edit some specific database tables. All very complicated. There's a much easier way to solve this problem. Just uninstall the ComServe. So once you have that temporary VM deployed, go in, remove the ComServe, then just reinstall it with the right service pack level of the database that you're going to be importing on. That way you get the right name, you get to choose the correct name that you need to select during the installer, and you don't have any of the residual issues that will come up with trying to use the old name. So yeah, just a very fast tip that if you're doing those migration or DR scenarios, reinstall the ComServe software once the VM's deployed, and that'll put you in a much better standing.
Always take the simple way.